Well, impact fees have their place. But you have to make sure that you're also applying them in a manner that is not going to adversely affect your growth. A few years ago, when we had a lot of growth, impact fees, a lot of places, a lot of communities, Woodland included, put impact fees in place. And that was to help to address serving that growth, and that gets to be a big problem, and that's definitely an issue. The other side of the coin now is that now we've had the economy is working on recovering from the situation we find ourselves in, and impact fees aren't nearly as tolerable as they used to be. And in fact, in Woodland, they actually put them on hiatus for a period of time to help to reduce that impact and to encourage growth. So, you need to measure them based upon the conditions you find yourself in. Again, the reason for impact fees is to help to spread the additional impact that is put on the community based upon that growth. I know in the case of Woodland, they've used impact fee money to purchase parkland, purchase fire truck, and those kinds of things. But growth, business growth, job growth, and employment growth are all very important, and you need to make sure that your city policies do not stand in the way and become a barrier to that kind of a growth. I'm not an advocate of increasing taxes. I'm an advocate of we've got a budget and we need to live within that, and we got to prioritize in it. And when you prioritize, you got to go with your basic services first. You got to be able to get around town, so you got to take care of your streets. We got to have water. We got to have sewer. You need emergency services. You need to have some semblance of those that's able to show up, and they need to be able to do their job well. So you need to measure as a community what you believe that critical and essential level is. All of us during these economic times are having to do with less, and it's the same thing with city government. The problem gets to be is that people get used to having a certain level of service, and then when that community can't afford that, then they're unhappy. They don't want to give it up. But we're all in that same boat. The city is no different. So, especially the economic times we find ourselves in, I'm not an advocate of increasing taxes. But you have to find what you can live without. In Woodland, for an example, a couple years ago, they decided they needed a community garden. Wasn't budgeted. Was it nice to have? Yes. But right now, it's basically sitting idle. And so they put those resources into that, but it's not even being used. It was kind of like a fad. And those are the kinds of things that we have to measure. No matter what you do, somebody's going to be unhappy and are going to want something that you're not able to provide. But it, again, comes back to what the core service that you need to provide your community, what we need to provide in our case, our Woodland community, that we can afford. It would be nice to have things, and everybody always wants things that they can't afford, but it comes down to the basics. On the west coast of the United States, we've always lagged behind in most areas as far as rapid transit is concerned. I've never lived on the East Coast, but I've visited there fairly regularly. And there's a difference of night and day between rapid transit on the West Coast for most communities and the East Coast. That being said, this is also part of our culture here on the West Coast, is that people spend more time in their cars. We like to have our independence, and I guess that's part of what drove our forebearers out here by wagon train and all kinds of different things, and ended up with Lewis and Clark paving the way and so forth. So it is good to do studies to see how things are going to work so that you can plan for them, but at the same time, you can't force people to use things that they're not going to use. So as far as in a metropolitan area taking away lanes, when you've already got traffic issues and congestion to begin with, that's tough to swallow, because you take the issue then becomes, are people because of that going to use the rapid transit, or is it just going to just make traffic worse? So I'm not a traffic engineer, but those are kinds of things that communities and community governments need to decide on behalf of their communities. That's not something we're facing yet in Woodland, but at the same time, we have to be cognizant of, and that's really part of what I look at, is that the decisions that we make today, how are they going to affect us 10 and 20 years from now? And I know in the case of Woodland, there are issues that continue to get revisited for decisions that were made relatively recently in the last couple of years, and it's like, oh, well, we decided to do this, well, now we got to relook at things again. And that is our job as elected officials who represent our communities, is that we've got to put some vision into this, and we've got to put some planning into this, and just not take a shotgun insular approach to a particular issue at that particular moment. It comes back to what I said earlier. We need to, I believe we need to figure out how to best serve the citizens with the resources we have now. But I also advocate very strongly that the people need to decide what they want. And so by having, as an example, a proposition in place that's proposed, the people get to decide. That's the way the democratic process works. And so they'll decide, and on the basis of that, then you get to move forward. Part of the responsibility of government is to put these things forward to folks. Not everybody believes that, because they're going, well, people, I've heard it said, well, people just don't know what they're doing. Well, I don't agree with that. It's up to each of us to stay on top of the issues, to be informed, and not just to go fill out our ballot in a vacuum, not knowing what we're talking about. But we also know that that's the way that it is. But that's part of our government. That's what's parts of what makes our democratic society so great. So you put forward that option, the people get to decide, and when it's decided, we move forward from there. I think that we need to move forward on mass transit, because until we do, we're not going to have that option, and people aren't going to change those behaviors. At the same time, as I already said, whether they change their behaviors or not remains to be seen. Putting that forward for federal dollars and federal funding brings those dollars here, and it benefits our community. You've got folks that say, hey, well, that's just going to, it may be not the best use of federal dollars. Well, that's up to the federal's going to decide. At the federal government level, they're going to make those decisions. So moving forward with this project to put it into the mill, so to speak, to be considered, is going to have benefits here. I know that there's a lot of mixed opinions as far as light rail is concerned. But it would be great somewhere in the future for me to get on some type of a transit system, a light rail, monorail, whatever it is, in Woodland and be able to go to Seattle. It's like I need to go to Seattle this weekend. And it would be nice to be able to get on something to be able to do that. But there really isn't much available other than I could take the train. I got to drive to Vancouver, take the train, and then go back north, or I could go to Kelso. So I think we need to be looking at those kinds of options, and so I support looking at those options. Growth is going to happen. You know, the whole Northwest area is growing. We've had historically a lot of growth in Clark County and has edged over into the southern part of Cowlitz County. It's part of the American way. It's kind of, you know, again, how we settled here to begin with. That's just how we are. We like to spread out. People like to find their plot of land and put in their business, and that's just how our society works. You know, I believe that we need to manage growth. We need to plan for growth, and that's just as we're able to afford to, we put in additional freeways and highways and grow them because we have to. We know that you know, the I-5, 205 interchange is a really muddled mess. Whatever was put in 30 years ago, we far exceeded what it's able to support. So does that make more area accessible? Yes, it does. But that's also what people want and people are looking for. And then in turn, then we've got to figure out how to serve it. As far as another river crossing at 192nd, I don't know that I advocate that. I think that we need to take care of the river crossing at the interstate bridge. We need to address that problem and make it big enough to meet our needs, rather than, you know, how many of us want to go up and down the Columbia River and just go from, you know, you're boating up and down, you're taking a scenic tour, and, you know, about every mile you're going underneath another bridge river crossing. I don't know that that's necessarily what we want. So those are things that we have to look at, and no matter what's decided, somebody's going to be unhappy. How do you put enough money away on a we'll use Woodland as an example. The city the size of Woodland is 5,500 people. At some point they want to put an underpass or an overpass to connect the east side of the city and the west side of the city at Scott Avenue. That project is going to cost $10 million or more. A city the size of Woodland, who has an annual operating budget right now of about $13 million, how do you put that kind of money away? There are some things that is just tough to take care of. The other side of the coin, though, is that it's important that we plan for things that we know we're going to need to replace. You need to have a plan to replace city vehicles, you know, police cars, fire engines, public works graders, those kinds of things, and we need to have a plan so that when it comes time to replace them, we can. City government, historically, at least in Woodland, isn't really good at that. I know plans have been proposed for replacement schedules. They say they want a replacement schedule, but when it comes time to fund the replacement schedule, they don't fund it because, well, we need this money here and this money here. It comes back to we need to have a fiscally responsible budget that accounts for all of that. And if you need to put money into your replacement fund, but you don't have enough money to do it, it means you need to make up the difference someplace else. It's no different than us at home. Historically, we've, as a culture, have gotten used to financing everything. You know, that hasn't always been the case. And I'm hopeful that after weathering the current financial picture that we find ourselves in, both as families and as government, that we recognize that we need to be much more fiscally responsible in the future at all levels for us, and that there's that kind of good that will come out of it. I've, put myself in as a candidate for Woodland City Council because Woodland can do a lot better. Woodland is a beautiful place, right on I-5. A lot of people pass through town. It's and it's real close and has a lot of advantages. I mean, within literally tens of minutes, you can be in the mountains, you can be on the river, you can be fishing, you can be picnicking, but at the same time, within a half an hour, I can be to the airport to fly out of town in Portland, or be in downtown Portland. And over the last few years, I don't believe Woodland has done right by its citizens from a government standpoint. The council and the mayor haven't gotten along. They don't listen. They don't listen to each other. I don't think they listen to their community, except that they sometimes have a tendency to listen more to special interests than anything. Someone showing up at a council meeting being unhappy about it means one person showed up at a council meeting is unhappy about something. It doesn't make it a crisis. It just means that somebody's unhappy and they're exercising their democratic right to come in and tell their elected government that, hey, this is something that bothers me. Doesn't mean that you go fix that particular thing, but it means is that you take it into account. I think that we need to be much more fiscally responsible as a government in Woodland. I think that we need to be we need to have a vision. We need to know what we want Woodland to look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and we need to be making those decisions based upon that. It doesn't mean that every decision that you make is based upon what's going to happen down the road, but you have to be cognizant that those decisions will affect us down the road. And you do not want to spend money fixing something later that you already spent money on. That serves nobody any purpose. And so, so I believe that I can help with that process. I've been involved with public service all my adult life. 30 years in the fire service, I understand what public service is all about. And at the same time, I also understand budgeting. I understand that you got to work within a budget, that you've got to plan for the future, and that you need to be able to count on putting that plan into effect. So I think I can do better than most in filling that role as a city council member, and so that's why I became a candidate. So we'll see what happens after the first week in November.